Welcome to Recogs, the show where we learn how the world's best operators build consumer brands from sourcing to selling. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you a little bit about Manufactured. Manufactured is an online platform that helps brands manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory across 20 industries and 25 countries. Stick around after the interview where I chat with Pranay, the CEO of Manufactured, who shares his tips for building new products and operating successful brands. If you also need manufacturing help for your brand, visit manufactured.com. Our guest today is Caroline Cotto, COO at Renewal Mill. Renewal Mill is a food company that fights climate change and global food loss by upcycling byproducts from food manufacturing into superfood ingredients. It's super cool. They produce their own products like baking mixes and sweet cookies. They're in Whole Foods nationally. They both produce their own products like baking mixes and sweet cookies, as well as being an ingredients company. We discuss the in and outs of upcycling, how they partner with manufacturers to produce their own flour and products, and the business model of being an ingredients company versus a brand, and much, much more. Without further ado, here's Caroline. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited to have you on. I know it's been a long time since we caught up, so really excited to kind of hear an update on everything we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a whirlwind of the last 3 years with the pandemic, so excited to share.
Yeah, I bet. Start from the very beginning. What was the insight or aha moment that led you to found Renewal Mill?
Yeah, so I have a co-founder named Claire, and the idea for Renewal Mill actually came out of her firsthand experience with food waste. So she started Boston's first organic juice company, and was seeing all of the pulp go to waste every day in that process. And then we had a fortuitous conversation with the owner of a large tofu company who essentially said, "You think you make a lot of pulp in your tiny juicing business. I'm making tons and tons of soybean pulp every week that, at best will go to animal feed and at worst will go to landfill." So that was really the lightning moment for us to say, well, what if there was another way to keep all of that valuable nutrition in the supply chain? And we set out on a journey to do that.
Really fascinating. What were kind of the first steps for you, as you say, like set out your journey and what eventually became Renewal Mill? What from that moment, what was kind of like the next step?
Yeah. So once we got our hands on this pulp that comes out of the soy milk making process, it's called okara. We started kind of just doing a deep dive into this ingredient itself. So it's a traditional Japanese ingredient. Okara is actually the Japanese word for the pulp left over when you make soy milk. We found that it was about 60% fiber, 20% complete protein because it comes from a legume. So full of nutrition and really neutral in color and flavor. And so we started just dehydrating it in our kitchen and milling it in a blender and then using it in all sorts of different applications and quickly realizing, wow, there's a lot of potential with this ingredient to integrate into traditional flour-based products and boost the taste and the nutrition of them. And then we quickly saw that we needed to scale up. So we had a little bit of a proof of concept on the bench, but in order to make this into a full-scale ingredients business, we needed to find a way to take the full volume of this pulp coming off of the soy milk processing line and make it shelf-stable as quickly as possible. And that we did through creating some drum drying technology in order to make that pulp shelf-stable and ingredient ready.
So you created your own technology, right? Like the drum drying technology, is that right?
Yeah, so we used a combination of some off-the-shelf technologies and then made adjustments to them to make it a little bit more responsive to factory conditions, a little bit more efficient.
And so were you kind of taking this technology to eventually co-manufacturers and saying, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to turn leftover pulp into flour-based ingredients. And is there a way we can partner with you? Also, how are you thinking about partnering with co-manufacturers?
So actually, we were partnering with the producers themselves. So soy milk companies, tofu producers, and then we as we kind of grew the business, we started expanding into other plant-based milk byproducts as well. But the two problems with byproducts are that they spoil very quickly, usually within 4 hours. And when they're coming off of the processing line, they're about 80% moisture. So they're extremely heavy to transport. So we said, okay, we can help you solve this problem by co-locating drying technology inside your manufacturing facility and processing that pulp as soon as it comes off of the manufacturing line to make it shelf stable, and then transport it. So we're not paying to truck around water. And so we own the equipment, install it inside of the manufacturing facilities of our partners, and then pay a processing fee similar to a co-manufacturing relationship for them to actually operate the equipment.
Wow. So the manufacturers where you actually were getting this pulp leftover from the soy milk companies, you're actually then producing product. You actually turn around, installing your machines, producing product, this flour product there on site at them, and they were actually kind of like your manufacturer.
Yep, and then we take the flour to a third-party co-manufacturing facility to make value-added products with it, like baking mixes and ready-to-eat cookies. And as we've grown, that's how we started, was this co-location model. As we've grown our portfolio of upcycled ingredients beyond just the Okara, we also found that some producers were actually doing the processing of the ingredients, but they didn't want to sell it because it was so far outside of their normal products that they sell. So we're the exclusive sales offtake arm for some producers for their byproduct streams, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How does also pricing work with the raw materials? Are the soy milk companies, since this is leftover, are they not charging you at all for the actual pulp? And they're just charging you a fee in order for you to store your manufacturing gear, or how does that process work?
It's slightly different with each partner. So we've kind of tailored these relationships to meet the needs of each manufacturing partner. In some cases, that's correct. We're not paying for the raw material, but we're paying a processing fee for them for like the energy that it takes to operate the equipment, essentially. In other cases, we are paying a small fee for the material. And then that's when they're doing the processing of it, and then we're just the sales arm of it.
Cool. That's awesome. And so when you so it depends, I guess, who your manufacturer is, but or where you go into in terms of how the actual pricing works. But then how did you also think then initially about sales channels and which sales channels you wanted to get into?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we started, we were a bit naive, honestly, and thought like, okay, we'll just be an ingredients company. And we were going to burst onto the scene with this new, amazing upcycled ingredient, Okara flour. But the problem was nobody knows what that is. Nobody knows what it tastes like. Nobody has ever heard of it and is probably pronouncing it as okra flour if they're trying to read it. So there were a lot of challenges. So we quickly realized if we were going to sell this ingredient, we needed some proofs of concept that people could taste and say, oh, I can see how it performs in my favorite chocolate chip cookie, and I can, easily make that mental jump. So that's why we started producing ready-to-eat products, was that so that people could actually taste the flour and kind of understand the concept. And then that was also it turned out to be a much faster revenue stream to make value-added products and sell them direct to consumer and to retail and to food service while we worked on some of these longer-term ingredients conversations. Because what we found was that selling bulk ingredients to large corporate companies, like Fortune 500 food companies, takes on average 4 to 5 years, especially if it's like a novel ingredient that they've never used before. And obviously we couldn't sustain ourselves as a business for waiting for that long. So in the meantime, we sold smaller quantities to smaller startup companies on the ingredient side of the business, and then also supplemented with value-added products made with our ingredients, which also provided more data in the marketplace about how they were performing that we could share back with potential ingredient customers.
How did you think about the split between the amount of product that you produce in order for to give to small emerging companies until these big corporates kind of come in with that 4 or 5 year cycle versus like the own brand and the own products that Renewal Mill was actually making?
Yeah, I think, at the beginning, because we're controlling our own brand and how much volume it is, more ingredient was going into that side of the business. But as we've kind of grown over the years, we're getting closer and closer to a 50-50 split of how much product is going straight to our ingredient customers versus going into our own branded products that use the ingredients.
And is the goal or the ideal goal that to be, since it's now a 50-50 split, but before it was predominantly more so Renewal Mill the brand versus just being an ingredient company, is the goal to actually be more of an ingredient company than actually a brand?
We actually see that they're really synergistic. So we're kind of continuing to grow them simultaneously. And as we bring new ingredients into the portfolio, we have an easy way to showcase them directly to consumers through our branded product side. I think ultimately we're going to continue growing both, and there are models like this. So Cargill often routinely, creates a branded product in order to sell their ingredients in things like stevia. I think when we think about potential exits for the company, it could be sold as two separate entities, like a brand and the ingredients arm. But for the time being, we're going to continue growing them both.
What are all of the ingredients or different products that you currently have on the ingredient side?
Yeah, so we started with that Okara flour, which is the kind of our flagship ingredient, and then quickly found that there was also a lot of pulp coming out of the oat milk making process. And you know how popular oat milk has been over the last few years, so lots of opportunity there. So we take the pulp left over from making oat milk and turn it into a high protein oat flour. It's almost 50% protein, so really, really great source there. And then we've also started taking the fine that comes off of milling cornmeal. So it's like it's not exactly a corn flour, which would come from grinding the whole corn kernel, but it's a byproduct of the cornmeal milling process that has a lot of starch content. So it's great for extrusion, other kind of like puff snacks products. And then we're just starting to dabble in 2 flours from fruit byproduct streams. So a green banana flour with the whole peel milled. It's like a whole green banana flour, and a pineapple fiber made from the dehydrated and milled pulp left over from pineapple juicing.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's awesome. What's that process like when you're thinking about new ingredients and thinking about opportunities when it comes to new ingredients? What as you know, the COO, I'm sure you're thinking about these things a lot. What kind of goes into when you think about or become curious about? Okay, well, the leftover of this could actually serve as a pretty interesting ingredient to make flour or those types of products. And also, I remember you saying that it really depends in terms of who's manufacturing it, how you actually are pricing it in terms of actually if you have to pay for the ingredient or not. But does that also come into play?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're kind of running all of the potential ingredients through a series, like a gauntlet, basically. People will come to us inbound a lot of the time and be like, I have, hundreds of thousands of pounds of peanut butter and jelly crust. Like, what can you do with it? And for me, I'm like, okay, we don't have an immediate use for that. So let me see if there's other people I can connect you to. But when we're evaluating byproduct streams that are of interest, we're kind of asking questions like, right now our entire portfolio is gluten-free. So is the product gluten-free? Is it collected in a food safe manner? Because a lot of the way that these processing lines are set up, the answer is no. So if no, could it be? If yes, great. We're asking about different certifications. So is it kosher certifiable? Is it gluten-free? Is it vegan? all of those sorts of things. And then we're really looking at the nutritional content. So is there like some nutrient density left in this product that would allow it to have value on the open market? So is there a sizable amount of fiber? Is there a sizable amount of protein? Is there some sort of functional benefit from enzymes or starches in it? And if it checks all of those boxes, then we're really looking at, can we use our same equipment process to make it shelf stable? And what kind of price point do we think we could command from customers? Like, what are the comparable ingredients that someone might sub this ingredient for? And if there aren't any, how can we price it as a sort of premium specialty flour?
When you are thinking about growth, and maybe the answer is both, but when you're thinking about what growth looks like for Renewal Mill, and of course it's, you have kind of the ingredient business, and then you also have Renewable, the brand, that you have your own flour mixes and baking mixes and what have you. When you think about growth, are you more focused on, okay, what are new ingredients we can potentially offer, or even ingredients that, or are you thinking about, okay, we have like this ingredient already that's doing maybe quite well. How can we scale that particular ingredient for either more new lines, different types of products on the renewal side, or find new partners?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. We've had pretty slow, steady growth as far as bringing new ingredients into the portfolio. The first 3 to 4 years, we're really just focused on the Okara flour and the oat milk flour, making sure that we could have pretty high level market penetration with those flours, just given the fact that we're one of the only producers of that product in the US, and that there's a lot of education that goes into selling that flour. So we really had to do a ton of work to build the foundation for upcycled ingredients and just educating customers on what are upcycled ingredients before we could even start really selling mass volumes of these. And I think we've started to see a lot of progress there, which has been really exciting. So we sell to customers who are branding the Okara on their package. We also sell to private label producers that are creating products for national grocery store chains using these flours. So we've been pretty measured on that side. But we're also opportunistic. So we've had some of these other, like I said, inbound interest from folks who are saying, I have this byproduct, it's a huge headache for me, can you help me? And we're saying, yes, that's a great opportunity. Let's work together to find a solution and, open up new sales opportunities for us as well.
That's a good position to be in, though, right? That now you're actually starting to receive inbound from manufacturers that have a byproduct, don't know what to do with a byproduct, and that's where you can that you've obviously generated a name for yourselves in order to actually figure that out.
Yeah, and I think we get a lot of inbound requests that we can't help with, and I wish that we could, but hoping that one day we'll be able to things like liquid ice cream base, or like all of these things that are sort of mixed, like the mixed fruit pulps and stuff that aren't segregated at the point of production, that currently have no home and are contributing to those sort of ghastly food waste numbers we're all familiar with at this point. But we're trying to do our part and really focus on where we can be impactful at the moment, and hopefully scale as we grow.
And on the product side, so like the flour and baking mixes, the cookies, the non kind of, we're not just using this as an ingredient, we're going to use it for our own products side of the business. How do you think about going to new categories and launching new products as well, and kind of that mix of trying to scale your current portfolio or launching new SKUs?
Yeah, we've been pretty grounded in the baking aisle. So we started with just the pure flours, and then around the same time that the pandemic started, moved into baking mixes, because what we were finding was that these flours are really great if you're an adventurous home baker who wants to get in there and make your own blends in the kitchen and isn't afraid to kind of like try and fail. But we needed something that was a little bit more approachable for the average consumer. So that's why we moved into the baking mixes, which each feature one of our upcycled ingredients, but only require the end user to add oil and water. So they're super easy to use, great way to introduce novel ingredients through a familiar vehicle, like a chocolate chip cookie or a brownie. And then we, having been in the baking aisle for a while, have realized, Americans like to bake, but they're not baking every day, right? So it's a pretty slow moving category on the whole. And so that's why we've moved into adjacent categories like sweet baked goods. So ready to eat cookie products that just are a little bit more conducive to grab and go and people kind of eating them, every other day or kind of on the fly.
What was been kind of the result, and did you have to pivot your business at all during the pandemic? What's been kind of like what have you've had to do on your end?
Yeah, no, we definitely had to pivot our business during the pandemic. We were kind of in the early days of selling ingredients, and most large corporate companies shut down their innovation teams because they weren't going into the office, so they weren't doing benchtop R&D. We also used to do a lot of on-site sales before the pandemic, so literally going to food companies to their R&D facilities and trying to educate them on site. So that definitely slowed down a bit. We're seeing it come back right now, which is really great. But the other big switch for us was that we were selling a lot of ready-to-eat cookies into food service before the pandemic, and that channel we were specifically selling mostly to offices for office snacks. That channel disappeared overnight. So we really had to move a lot of our business more into third-party e-commerce platforms like Thrive Market and Good Eggs, as well as into more traditional brick and mortar retail, which we hadn't really been in before. So now we're sold nationwide at Whole Foods and a lot of other independent grocery store chains in the natural specialty channel. And that was kind of, yeah.
Got it. So you were like kind of D2C, more exclusive per se, and then you went kind of full on like wholesale, whether that's online wholesale or retail brick and mortar.
Yeah, that was definitely accelerated by the pandemic for sure.
Cool. That's awesome. And how also do you think and that's fantastic that you're in all those channels. Congrats on being in Whole Foods nationwide. That's incredible. How also do you think about conventional grocery, and does Renewal Mill, because of course this is a premium product, although conventional grocery has become a lot more maybe aggressive, wanting more premium products and better for you products in their stores. How do you think that Renewal Mill fits into conventional?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now for us, our engagement with conventional has been mostly through their private label channels. So private label is growing across the board for grocery stores, but it really gives them a platform to educate consumers, especially about things like sustainable ingredients. So we work with some private label partners that are actually calling out the upcycle ingredients we provide them with on front of pack and using their platform to talk about how they're switching to more sustainable sourcing and what impact that has on the climate, all sorts of things like that. So that's kind of how we've chosen to engage. For our products under the Renewal Mill brand, they are definitely more premium price. So I think we're a few years out from going into more conventional stores with the Renewal Mill brand itself. But I do think that the average consumer is demanding more from the brands they buy from. They're demanding more transparency and sustainability. And so I think there will be a place in conventional grocery for brands like Renewal Mill. I just think from a perspective of where we are as a company financially, that it's not something we're pursuing right at this very moment.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. And that's also, I can understand why white label as well as an introduction into conventional is a great introduction to the consumer. And as well as they can also spend a lot more money on the actual customer education piece, which I'm sure is very, very helpful for you.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't have to pay all of the money to do the marketing. They'll do it directly for us with their products, but we're getting the same end effect of the consumer being more engaged with upcycled ingredients and understanding what terms like Okara flour mean.
How do you, just because it is, using upcycled ingredients, these are ingredients that would be maybe in a landfill if it wasn't for you all. How do you think about COGS and just inventory and what those actually look like? Because it sounds like in some scenarios there are costs when it comes to ingredients, but in others there aren't. Maybe like the real costs are the actual amount of machinery, which and kind of the capex that you do for that. But like, how are you thinking overall about financing the inventory piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a common misconception that upcycled ingredients are automatically going to be cheap. People are like, oh, this was trash before, and now you're, waste to value creation. That is, true in some regard, but I think there are a lot of hidden costs. Like I said, food safety, big concern. There's a lot of things that go into processing to make sure that we can bring this to market in a way that's, maintain the integrity of it and that maintain the food safety. The packaging, all of those things that exist in normal ingredient processing. So there is some CapEx for getting that first equipment installation or kind of to have some sort of equipment for processing. But it's pretty similar to anything you would have for any other manufacturing process. Once that's in place, we have, pretty good margins on it because we're either, like I said, getting it for no cost and paying for the processing fee. So paying for that like energy that's going into powering the drying equipment, or we're getting it for lower cost than like any sort of net new virgin ingredient would be. From the processor's side, we're saving them money because they don't have to pay to have this material trucked away to landfill. So we're eliminating tipping fees that they might have to pay for that. So for us, from a COGS perspective, we're thinking about it as there is some sort of cost for the material, whether or not you're actually paying for the raw material or paying for the processing of it, plus packaging and transport costs.
Cool. No, that's really helpful. Thanks so much for that explanation. In this current environment, also, how are you thinking about like cash flow management in terms of financing this COGS? Is it typically through financing? Are you kind of wrapping up a lot of cash in COGS? How are you thinking about like that balance?
Yeah, it's been an interesting funding journey for the company. So the first 2 years, the company were grant funded. We did a lot of the work on kind of commercializing the technology with that grant funding. Then we took on some traditional venture capital funding and used that as the first funding to fund the initial CapEx investment, and then have subsequently turned more to debt financing for equipment. And then, we have raised some equity crowdfunding and some like safe note funding throughout the pandemic to kind of keep operations going. But yeah, I think like any traditional sort of CPG business, we do have to front a lot of cash in order to run production and keep inventory in stock, especially as we grow in retail partners like Whole Foods. And so we have taken and continue to work with some working capital providers to keep things going there, and are working towards profitability. We're not there quite yet, but that is a goal of ours, especially given the fundraising environment right now.
No, that's thanks so much for the transparency. That's really, really great. My final question for you, Caroline, is what would you value more today? $100 in your inventory, so you have $100 in your inventory, or $100 cash?
That is a great question.
And this inventory, by the way, is not like retail price at all. Like you could sell it then at retail price. Like this is just like if you had $100 of Renewal Mill baking mixes or cookies versus $100 of cash.
I think just if like gun to my head this moment, I would say inventory, because right now we have a good problem that we have more purchase orders than we are able to fulfill. So we're trying to get that inventory built back up and supply all of our partners. And I think that cash for marketing, which is probably where I'd want to spend it. There's a lot to figure out right now with ads being really expensive and sort of traditional social media marketing kind of going off the rails. So we need to kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out how to get the most ROI out of a single dollar of cash. But if I have inventory, I know how to sell it.
Cool. Awesome. Love that answer. Love that answer. Caroline, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
And there you have it. It was a pleasure chatting with Caroline. Caroline, thanks again so much for coming on the show. So listeners, before we let you go, we wanted to give you some tips on how to help operate your business and learn how Manufactured is helping businesses. So we have Manufactured CEO Pranay Srinivasan, who's CEO of Manufactured here on the line. Pranay, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. So what do you see, Pranay, are some of the biggest challenges operators are facing relating to inventory?
I think operators face three kinds of challenges at inventory. The first challenge is starting out when you don't know if the inventory you're actually investing in will sell through or not. Is there demand for it? And I think a lot of validating demand gets confused with vendor incentives, which is how many do I make? And I think, drop shipping systems and AliExpress systems and Alibaba systems and off the shelf systems have done a lot to help people do this. And I think that there's a lot more work to be done here. Where can you build an authentically unique product without having to bet the farm and spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to validate whether that inventory will sell through or not? So I think that's the first challenge in merchants and customers face or brands face. I think the second challenge they face as they grow is underestimating demand and running out of inventory and then understanding where the balance is. So many people in 2020 thought that that was the new normal when COVID hit, and there was all this printing of money and all these different incentives, and everybody was at home doing nothing. And everyone thought e-commerce was going to be the future of everything. And so they went out and bought all this inventory and loaded up and thought 2021 would be the greatest year ever. And then the market fell out and crashed, and Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook pulled the rug under all the acquisition costs, and the CAC went up the roof. And they quickly realized that there's nothing steady in the world anymore. It's all choppy. It's all like heart waves, sine waves going up and down. So one day you're good, one day you're bad. And so how do you actually navigate that, where one day you have unlimited demand and the second day you can't get rid of your inventory for 3 months? And so that's the second challenge that they're facing. And then the third challenge I think entrepreneurs are facing is, at what point is it good enough for me to have more than one product that customers can identify with, so I can actually acquire a customer once but make money 3 or 4 times on them? And that's basically product adjacencies. Am I being authentic with the product? Am I selling a basket of products? What am I doing there? And then how do I actually have inventory for my hero product versus inventory for my, more boutique products or designer products, whatever you want to call it? I think those are the three core challenges that 90% of merchants face. And I think then everything stems from there.
I think also if you throw in the fact that we've gone through over the past couple of years this global supply chain crisis, so everyone is ordering way more inventory farther in advance, and then of course you have CACs getting out of control, and you have of course e-commerce penetration pulling back, and so you're really just sitting on loads and loads of inventory because you have to do you're planning far and far in advance as well.
Yeah, and I think most people overpaid for inventory because freights were high and shipping was high and duty was high. I saw this funny story about a public company that tried to mark its earnings by saying we basically would have been profitable if we paid 2022 freight prices instead of 2021 freight prices. And unfortunately, that's not how business works, right? If you paid a price, you paid a price. It's all done. And I think what's happening now is most people are realizing they have this really high cost basis of their inventory, and you can get cheaper inventory now, but you bought inventory at such a high price and you kept thinking you would blow through it. Now you have to spend more money to spend through it. So now you've doubled the value of that. You've basically spent more money on that inventory and you're losing money on that. So not only do you have no money to buy new inventory at lower prices that you would be mildly profitable on, you've got this big overhang of excess inventory from bad years with the amount of money you need to spend to acquire customers to get them. That's decimating every single piece of free cash flow you have.
And that's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the whole thing, and I hope it was helpful. For more information about Manufactured, head to manufactured.com. It's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening.